Welcome back, thrill seekers. Today we have 3 house-sitting horror stories. I am sure you will agree with me that the worst betrayal is those perpetrated by loved ones. My parents run a house-sitting agency, and from time to time I helped out and stayed over at the properties when my parents did not have any sitters available to cover the booking. Generally, if these bookings were regular trusted clients and were close to home, my parents would let me do it. I was always curious about how other people lived, and I loved to snoop around, especially if it was a businessman's bachelor pad. They didn't mind that I played with their PlayStation, as long as I didn't break anything, watered the plants, and fed their pets. I had just turned 16 when my parent got a last-minute booking from a new client who needed to travel for business at short notice. He needed someone to do regular check-in, water the plants, walk and feed his dog. By then, I was a pro at house-sitting. I popped in after school, opened the door with the keys my mom gave me. I did a quick check of the house. All the doors and windows were locked. I noticed price labels on a few of the furniture and cushions. That was strange. The house looked cleaned, and there were no pictures anywhere. The whole thing felt a bit off, to be honest. I played with the little dachshund for a few minutes before taking it for a walk. I noticed a car was following me when I was walking back to the house. It was rolling slowly, keeping pace with me as I walked with the dog. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of myself with the car in the background. It had tinted windows and impossible to see who was inside. When I rounded the corner to the property, I picked up the dog and ran the final few meters to the house. There was no one around, and the sun was already setting. I didn't look behind me, just took out the keys with shaky hands, opened the door as quickly as I could, got inside, and slammed the door shut. I heard a loud bang as someone smashed right into the door frame. Through the frosted glass, I could see the shape of a man outside. I deadbolted the door and immediately took out my phone to call my mom. In my panic, I did not see the man in the living room straight away. From the corner of my eyes, I saw movement, and my head snapped up. It was a middle-aged man. He was slowly standing up, holding his hands up in a calming motion, and started to slowly walk in my direction. The guy outside was knocking on the door and jiggling the doorknob, calling out to hurry up and open the door. Without hesitation, I threw the dog at the man in the living room and ran, trying to find a place to hide. I ran into the bathroom, locked the door. The bathroom was pretty small, and the window was too high and did not open wide enough for me to go through. "Boy, open the door. There is nowhere to go," the man said. I found a door stopper and jammed it under the door, shoved the hamper basket and anything I could find in front of the door. I dialed 911 and explained the situation. The woman on the line reassured me help was on the way and to hang tight. Suddenly, I heard another voice outside the door. The doorknob moved as he tried to open the door. Then he started kicking it to force it open. Terrified, I started crying and shouted on the phone, "Tell them to hurry." I heard the guys argue. One wanted to cut their loss and leave. The other said they had time before the police got here. Just as the door swung open, I heard a commotion in the living room and realized the police officers had gained access to the property. Both men raised their hands up as instructed and got down on their knees. As soon as the situation was under control, a female officer came to check if I was okay and escorted me outside. I saw my mom speeding down the road like a bat out of hell and screamed in relief when she saw me with the officers. Apparently, when I was interrupted earlier in the middle of calling her, I had in fact pressed call and she had heard the scuffle as I ran to the bathroom and slammed the door shut. The call was then disconnected. When she couldn't get through to me, she called the police, jumped into her car, and drove here as fast as she could. The officers had arrested 4 men. 3 were inside the house, and the driver was unable to get away. As it turned out, the driver was my paternal uncle. My mom's eyes nearly popped out of her head as they pulled him out of the car. He could not even look at us and kept his head down all the while the officers were reading him his Miranda rights and putting him in handcuffs. Mom gave me a tight hug and did not leave my side as the officers took my statement at the police station. We are a close-knit family, and my parents had always helped out anyone who needed help. That included my Uncle Liam. My dad was the eldest of 4 boys. The youngest was Uncle Liam. He was the proverbial black sheep of the family, always up to no good. My dad had had to bail him out of prison on several occasions. He promised he would change, but always reverted back to his old ways. Dad was fuming as he came into the station. The officers had to restrain him from rearranging my uncle's face. Turned out, he owed some bad people money. I mean, like, they were going to make him disappear if he did not pay up type of people. He offered me up as a repayment for his debt. Uncle Liam planned the whole thing. He asked them to call and make a last-minute booking. My dad was going to send me to check the house and feed the dog. They planned to kidnap me while I was out walking the dog, but I ruined the plan when I bolted. These bad people ran an illegal trafficking ring. Uncle Liam basically offered me up in exchange to have his debt cleared. My parents were beyond disgusted. All his life, my dad had watched out for him, offered him the help he needed to go straight and live an honest life. He chose to stay crooked, and now to repay my dad for his kindness, Uncle Liam used me as a bargaining chip to save his own life. Dad had cut all ties with Uncle Liam, and I no longer house sit, even if I wanted to. It took years for my parents to relax and let me live my life without constantly hovering over me. Last I heard, Uncle Liam was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He will be 55 when he is released. Sometimes, the worst betrayal is from those that are closest to us. My best friend, Paul, needed to attend a funeral back in Scotland. His brother had passed away after losing the battle against cancer. Paul had recently separated from his girlfriend, and there was no one else to take care of his pets. He had an array of reptiles, from snakes, lizards, bearded dragons, turtles, and a few more. He had also took in some stray dogs and cats over the years. In return for this favor, Paul offered to let me pick any animal or reptile I wanted, as long as it was not his childhood dog, Flash. As a writer, I can work from anywhere. It was not a problem for me to stay at his place until he came back. It was a win-win situation, except his place smelled horrible. I have been to pet stores, but as soon as you walked in, there was that thick smell that hung in the air and formed a slimy layer on top of practically everything. Some sort of grimy substance. I suppose this was years of unventilated and unclean layers of dust. I don't know. I decided to focus on selecting which pet I was going to pick. Paul lived in a cul-de-sac. The detached house was set apart from the other rows of houses and overlooked a railway track separated by high metal fences with barbed wire at the top. There were no houses overlooking the property. If you did not mind the train going by all hours, it was not a bad place. After dropping Paul at the airport, I went home, packed a few things in a holdall, and the bits and pieces I needed for work. It was already 8 in the evening by the time I got back at Paul's place. It was dark, and the dogs were restless, barking incessantly. There were 4 dogs in the kennel. I quickly checked on the reptiles, then took the dogs out for a walk around the neighborhood. When everyone was fed and quiet, I put a bed linen on the sofa in the dining room, not wanting to touch any of the greasy furniture, let alone sleep on any of the beds. This was where I was going to park myself for the next few days. I am no germaphobe, but this place was giving me a serious case of heebie-jeebies. Before bedtime, I was watching a movie on my laptop when I heard something. It sounded like a scratching sound in the wall. I thought maybe one of the cats was playing, probably trying to get a bug on the wall, scratching it with its claws in the process. So, I brushed it aside. After 10 minutes, the scratching continued and was slowly getting on my nerve. There was no way I would be able to sleep with that sound. I closed my laptop and went to investigate where the noise was coming from. I stood in the hallway for a few minutes when it started up again. The house was on 2 levels. The ground floor had 2 reception areas, a kitchen with an open-plan dining room where I was sitting, a cloakroom, and a basement. There were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom on the first floor. One of the reception rooms kept the reptiles, and the other kept the dog's kennel and cats. The 3 cats were curled up in their cat tree sleeping, and the dogs were sleeping in their kennels. The scratching noise was intermittent. I slowly walked along the corridor, checked to make sure the reptile enclosures were closed, and all the reptiles were accounted for. The sound seemed to be moving. I wondered if it was a mouse or rat in the walls. Pissed, I searched the kitchen for mouse traps and found a couple under the sink. The house was unkempt, and there were holes in the walls where Paul had attempted to do some DIY jobs and left holes in several places in the property. I set one trap inside one of the holes with a piece of cheese and went down to the basement to set the second trap. There was a wooden stairway leading down into the dark basement. I found the light switch at the top of the stairs. I slowly made my way down into the dimly lit room. The light flickered a few times, like it was going to go out. Hurrying up, I found another hole near the second light switch at the bottom of the stairs. I set the trap, put a piece of cheese, and inserted the trap in the hole. The light bulb was behind me, which was casting a shadow. I could not see clearly inside the hole when my hand brushed something furry. Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain. I pulled out my hand, gasping in pain when I realized there was a spider on my hand. As it started to crawl up my arm, I screamed and swiped it off me, taking a few steps back, checking where it had landed. There were more spiders emerging from the hole near the light switch, and as I turned my head, I saw a huge spider web behind me and all along the walls, the fixtures, and ceiling. There must have been around 50 or 60 of them crawling on the walls, the ceiling, and floors. I had inadvertently disturbed the web and made a ruckus. The spiders were coming out looking for food. I ran up the stairs screaming, running my hands over my head and shirt, feeling like they were crawling all over me. I ran outside, screaming, took my shirt, trousers, and shoes off. Once I was sure there was nothing on me or my hair, I called the police explaining the situation. There were tarantulas living in the walls. I remember a few years ago, Paul mentioned that both his tarantulas had escaped, and he had never found them. He had assumed they had died. Animal control was called to assess the situation. After they had safely removed all the pets from the property, they started collecting the tarantulas for safe transport to a sanctuary. In total, they found over 100 live tarantula living in the wall and over 1,000 of unhatched eggs. The dark, dry and cool basement was the perfect place for them to breed. The sound I was hearing was them chasing and eating mice in the walls. The house was condemned by the health authorities until it was fumigated and professionally cleaned and sanitized. Years of decomposing mice in the walls had produced a grimy gas which had permeated the house and left grimy deposits on all the surfaces. In the end, Paul had all his pet reptiles confiscated and was banned from ever owning a reptile as pets. We are no longer on speaking terms, and Paul blamed me for what happened. He thought I should have called him first before contacting the authorities. If I had to do it all over again, I would not have changed a thing. It is one thing putting his own life at risk, but according to animal control, it was a matter of time before the hungry tarantula got into the pet reptiles' enclosures and attacked them. I still have nightmares of that night, and sometimes I can feel them crawling all over me. My brother, Jake, is an engineer and travels a lot for work. After breaking up with a long-term girlfriend, he had moved back to London. Everyone was so happy to have him back. He was ready to settle and bought a 3-bedroom house not far from my parents. The best part was I could spend time house-sitting when he was away. I had just started university that year, and from time to time I would have my friends over for girls' night or to study. It's been 8 months since Jake had moved back home. This time he was off for a month working on a project in Germany. I was in the living room reading a book when I heard a knock on the door. It was just gone past 9 o'clock in the evening. I was not expecting anyone. I was debating whether I should ignore it when there was another louder, more aggressive knock. I looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. Rushing to one of the windows in the living room, overlooking the front door, I pulled back the curtain. There was no one there. I was alone in the house, and proper freaked out now. Jake was planning to have security cameras installed at the property, but he never got around to it. That would have been handy right about now. I checked that all the doors and windows were locked, then retired to the bedroom. I kept all the lights out and peeked outside. I kept watch for about half an hour. There was no movement. Feeling incredibly silly at this point, I chalked it all up to neighborhood kids playing a prank. I went to bed and nothing else happened that night. The next day, I went to classes as normal. When I came back and walked through the front door, I had a strange feeling. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked around in the living room, dropped my bag in the hallway, and made my way to the kitchen quietly. I heard a door creak behind me, but before I could turn around, I felt a sharp pain, and everything went dark. When I came to, I was tied to a chair in the kitchen. There was a red-haired woman sitting across the table staring at me. She looked familiar, but I could not place her. So, he did not waste time to move on to a younger woman. What is it with men? The older they get, the younger they want the woman to be. She mumbled to herself. She lit up a cigarette and glared at me. I realized who she was. She was Jake's ex-girlfriend. They had been dating on and off since university. Fiona? I asked. Oh, so he does talk about me. What did he say? She growled. Nothing much. My brother had showed me your picture once. I finished letting her digest this information. She scoffed and slapped me hard across the face. Good try. He bought a house, and you two are living in it, and you want me to believe he is your brother. You think I am stupid and would buy that load of crap. You have to try harder, love, and maybe, just maybe, you will get out of this in one piece. Fiona turned on her heels and left the room. The zip tie was digging into my skin and cutting off blood circulation. My arms were pinned to my side, and my wrist tied to the metal leg. My ankle was also tied to the chair leg with a piece of rope. I grabbed the chair and slowly stood up as the chair leg slid free of the ropes around my ankle. As quietly as I could, I put down the chair on top of the table and shimmied my wrist down the chair legs. Once freed, I grabbed a knife and peered into the hallway. I could smell petrol. She was going to burn down the house with me in it. She was in the garage, draining petrol from Jake's car. I quickly shut the garage door and locked it. It might buy me some time to call 911. Fiona ran up to the door screaming and tried to force the doors open with a crowbar. I called the police, explaining there was an arson in progress. I immediately called my dad, explaining the situation. Both Dad and the authorities arrived within 5 minutes. Unfortunately, Fiona had already set fire to the garage and was gone. The fire had done extensive damage to the garage, and Jake's car was scrapped. Nobody was more surprised than Jake. He would have never imagined in a million years that Fiona was capable of this. He had known her for nearly a decade, and he was aware of her jealous tendencies, but to try to kill someone, that was mind-boggling. And yes, Jake had installed the security system the very next day. Fiona was caught a few days later, driving along the motorway. Jake went to the hearing, and when the judge referred to me as Jake's little sister, Fiona burst out into a cackle, gasping for air, and screeched she was telling the truth. Carried on cackling until the judge asked for her to be taken away. Well, Jake had a lucky escape. That's all I'm saying. Please take care of yourself and listen to your guts. Sometimes it's not all paranoia.